Welcome to the ULAT. If this is your first exposure to the program, welcome, and let me explain what ULAT means. ULAT, those letters, stand for Universal Language Acquisition Tool. And this is a program I've created which is based upon what I call the natural language acquisition sequence. The natural means of learning one's native language proceeds from listening and speaking as an infant and to a small child, and then to reading about the age of 5 typically, and then even a little bit later to the act of writing, as opposed to the traditional textbook approach, I should say maybe the text-based approach, which you find in a traditional language classroom where you have written exercises and reading exercises, activities right from the very first day of class practically. And that's inconsistent with the way in which we learned our native language. And the ULAT seeks to teach you to think in your new language as does a native speaker. And to do that, it follows this natural language acquisition sequence. Practically, what that means for you is that approximately the first 70 lessons, you will see no words whatsoever in written form, any text whatsoever. This is because we don't want you to think with reference to your native language, nor with reference to printed text. My goal is to train you to think in a two-step thought process, going directly from the level of a concept in your mind to the target language, to this new language you're learning, expressing yourself in this new language, as opposed to the result of traditional text-based instruction, where a person learns to think in a 5-step process and ends up speaking in a very awkward, stilted, halting fashion. If you're really interested in understanding the theory behind all this, which I doubt you are, you could go to the teachers section of the ULAT website and there watch the first video in which I explain in more detail why text-based instruction too early in a student's learning, before a student is developed relative oral fluency, is actually very damaging to their prospects of ever speaking a language fluently. But I'll just assume that you buy into my method for the moment. And what is my method? Well, let me show you a brief presentation of the ULAT method. So what is the ULAT method of language transmission? Well, here are 8 different stages presented on this screen right here that talk about elements that you'll commonly find in ULAT lessons. All elements will not necessarily be present in every lesson, but you'll find these throughout the ULAT. The first stage is, I call the observation stage, and this is where you are presented with a video clip of an action of some kind, or a still image of a noun, an object, or maybe a quality a person would have, which is to say an adjective. And as you're presented with this image or video clip, you hear a sound associated with it that you are to repeat. This is a video clip of the concept of to listen. Now, I just gave you the meaning of this word. That will not happen in the ULAT. There's no translation whatsoever. Through being exposed to the same word in various contexts, you'll come to understand their meaning. But for the sake of this presentation, I'll go ahead and tell you what things mean. So I click on the image.
Escuchar.
And you see the man who is listening to music, obviously, with a headset on. And you hear the word in Spanish, escuchar, which is the verb in Spanish, to listen. The next step is after you've been exposed to and got a first sense of what might be the meaning of the word, you've been exposed to that word and its pronunciation, you will see a gesture which I have you perform at first to aid you in retention of that vocabulary. As I click on this picture, watch the gesture that I perform to represent the idea of to listen.
Escuchar.
There you see escuchar.
Escuchar.
Escuchar. And of course you repeat it, not just the word, but you repeat the gesture too. Which helps you in retention of that vocabulary. Performing a motor activity, an activity with your body, at the same time that you say a word, greatly enhances your ability to recall, to remember that vocabulary. The third stage is once you've learned this gesture, I take a still image from that particular video clip that represents the idea of listening, and that still image, as I click on it, escuchar, comes to represent this concept, this idea of listening throughout the course of the rest of the ULAT program. The fourth stage, I put that still image into a sentence, into a series of images which form a sentence, And these other images are ones that you would have already been, with which you would have already been presented. and therefore you would understand readily. This, for example, again, I wouldn't translate normally, but here for your sake, to help you understand the process, I will. This is he listens to the radio. I click on any of these three images and I hear
Él escucha la radio.
Él escucha la radio, which in Spanish, of course, is he listens to the radio. The next step, the fifth step, it's now time for you to form the complete sentence yourself. You see these three different statements, assuming you've already learned the vocabulary for music, classical music and rock music. You would be able to say, Él escucha la radio, and then you click, or excuse me, Él escucha música, and then you click on the images.
Él escucha música.
And you can confirm whether you said the statement correctly or incorrectly. Next, Él escucha música clásica.
Él escucha música clásica. Él escucha música rock.
And I clicked on it too soon, but
Él escucha música rock.
and I confirm that I said the statement correctly. So now I've learned how to structure sentences using this particular vocabulary, this new word that I just learned, to listen. The sixth stage I call the acceleration stage or phase. And this phase is critical because now that you've learned to form a complete statement using this new vocabulary, I want you to be able to do so at an increasingly rapid rate of speed, so that eventually at the end of the video that you're about to see, you're being obliged to form this statement so quickly that there's no time to reflect in your native language. This is one of the tools that helps you learn to think in a two-step process rather than in that unwieldy, destructive five-step process I mentioned earlier. So let me show you what one of these PowerPoint videos resembles. You'll see a statement, and after the green screen, you have a certain leisurely period of time in which to form this statement, and then you'll hear the correct answer given to you before we move on to the next sentence. You'll say, Él escucha música. He listens to music. And you'll make a statement, and then you'll hear, Tú escuchas música clásica. Again, you form the statement, and you'll hear, Yo escucho música rock, etc. However, as we get farther and farther along, Él escucha, this is, ellos escuchan un CD. You see a yellow screen now. Now you have less time in which to form your statement, 1 second less, in fact. And these same statements will be presented to you. You need to form the statement now with less time before you hear the correct answer provided for you. And finally, you see the red screen, and now everything flies. Ellos escuchan la música clásica. Él escucha música rock. Tú escuchas la radio. Yo escucho un CD. You can see that you have very little time in which to form the statement. That's going to take practice and repetition, but the outcome, the fruit of this activity is very, very valuable. The ability to think in this two-step process rather than thinking in a way that passes through your knowledge of English first before you can form your statement. Well, those are the different stages of oral language development. Eventually, you will also be exposed at the 7th level to phonics instruction first. That is to say, the sounds created by different combinations of letters in the language you're learning, and then to a variety of different reading activities. Very elementary at first, accompanied by questions and giving the opportunity to engage in conversation with your instructor. And then finally, once you have a strong oral base and you've been exposed to the phonics of the language, you can read at an elementary level. You begin with elementary writing, and that occurs, that's the 8th stage of the ULAT process. Well, I've talked a little bit about my own theories as to how language is best presented and best learned, but why go to all the trouble of learning a language in the first place? Over the course of the next 3 or 4 videos, I'd like to talk about my own personal motivations for learning the languages that I did, and why I'm so happy that I went to the trouble. And the most fundamental reason for learning a language, of course, is to know people whom you could not know otherwise unless you could speak their native language. To be in a position to be influenced by them, or to influence them, or to be of service to them, and vice versa, at some point of their lives. That leads me to a story about when my wife and I, along with our children, lived in the far north of France, and I served as an assistant pastor of a church. And the people within our church ran every summer a kids club within on the ground floor of an apartment complex where we had a room that was available for our use. The kids we worked with were maybe 8 to 12 years old, more or less, but there was one older fella. His name was Emmanuel, who was 14 years of age. By that point, he'd already dropped out of school. Yes, it was possible at that point, at that time. And he would ride around the town on his motorbike looking for things to do to occupy his time. Well, when he would come to our kids' club's meeting, he wouldn't come inside. Rather, he would stay outside and tend to kind of make life difficult for us, speaking to the neighbors about us in a way that made us look kind of foolish, and basically being disruptive. And finally, I decided I need to go outside and just spend time with this guy so that I can keep him from disrupting the meetings. And I went out and started talking with him. And as time went by, I came to learn that this young fella didn't have many friends, basically. He needed somebody to befriend him, to spend time with him. And that's what I started doing. He would invite me over to his home. And I didn't necessarily go very willingly. It was not a very happy home life, unfortunately. However, I sensed this young fella needed a friend, and so I regularly would go over to his home, and we'd watch TV, we'd have a meal together, potentially. We'd just sit and talk. And although it was with great hesitation that I would go back, because it was not a happy home life, and I didn't necessarily feel respected in that situation, eventually, Emmanuel and I became to be pretty good friends, and he would come to my family's home, decorate the Christmas tree with us, have a meal with us, spend time with my family, got to know my kids very well. Well, this went on over the course of several years until my family and I moved back to the United States, and I lost track of him. However, just a few years ago, I received an email from him when he discovered my email address and that we could communicate in that fashion. And this is what he wrote. By the way, if you can read French, if you already know how to read and write French, you'll recognize that his French is not very accurate, that there are a lot of grammatical mistakes, and that's not surprising because he dropped out of school so early. But what he had to say was of great value to me. He wrote, "Dear Steve," that's not how you spell my name, but I am very touched to see that we can still communicate by mail. What a privilege, what a privilege it is to find one another again. I'm feeling immense joy in my heart to see that you're all doing well. I'd sent him a picture of my family. He knew my family members, and that's to what he's referring. Steve, I want you to know of my love for you. And I remember every time that you came to encourage me, and all the times that you played the role of a father in my life. I don't forget, and I really want to tell you that as for me, you play an important role in my life, dear Steve. We still have strong ties one to another. Well, for me, that's really the essence of the privilege of learning another language, is for the ability to be available to somebody who needs you to be available to them in their native language. So whatever the struggles you go through, try and envision the goal, envision the opportunity someday to know, to serve, to be influenced by, to influence the lives of the people that need you to speak their language. Well, before I close, let me just give you a quick whirlwind tour of the organization of the ULAT program, and then I can set you loose to explore it on your own without my help. So let's go first to the home page of the ULAT. Here you see the home page of the ULAT program, and of course the home button at the top will always take you back to this screen. Lessons will take you to a screen where you select the particular language that you are studying. Teachers is for the benefit, of course, of teachers, teaching them how to use the program itself. There are many videos as well as articles here that can help train a teacher in its use. Feedback tells you some of the experiences that others have had in using the ULAT program. History talks about how it was the ULAT came to exist. The author gives you some author button gives you some information about myself. Contact gives you an address as well as email address to which to write seeking help or information. And last of all, very importantly for you, the independent button takes you to a screen where you again select the lesson or the language you're studying, and then you go to the particular day's lesson that you are to perform. Not only is the day's lesson presented there for you, but also at the bottom of the screen you can access previous lessons that you've studied up to that point. Now, most commonly you will go directly to the independent button, select the lesson, the language you've chosen to study, and then you'll look and see what the activities are for that particular day, potentially going back and reviewing information. However, from the home page of the ULAT, you can go directly to the lessons themselves by clicking on Lessons, clicking on the particular language you're studying. And there you see, within the ULAT lessons, a table of contents outlining the 10 different units of which the ULAT is composed. So let me just spend a little time talking about the organization of the ULAT's lessons. The first unit deals with the 60 most commonly used verbs in any language. Once you've mastered these 60 verbs, you can express most any idea you need to express with a little bit of creativity. The second unit deals with daily routine activities. The third, the topic of vocabulary, is personal description, describing a person's physical appearance, their emotions, their clothing, the color of their clothing, etc. The fourth unit deals with domestic life, talking about a home, the rooms in a home, activities you perform in those rooms, furnishings, etc. Up to this point now, the first four units, you have not dealt with any written work whatsoever. Starting in Unit 2, you began to learn phonics after about 70 lessons, 50 in the first unit and 20 here within the second unit. You start to learn the phonics, the sounds that are created by combinations of letters within the language you're learning. And you start to do some elementary reading, but you do no writing whatsoever until you finally reach Unit 5. And Unit 5 is a review of the first four lessons, or first four units, I should say, in written form. We come to Unit 6, we again return to the spoken language, the oral language, and you deal with vocabulary concerning urban life. Unit 7 deals with nature. Unit 8, technology. Unit 9 is a review of the first 8 lessons, the first 8 units. And Unit 10 again goes back to the written language and studies the units 6 through 8 in written form. Now let's go inside one particular unit and you'll find a second table of contents. Here within Unit 1, for example, you see a total of up to 50 different lessons. By clicking on one of the lessons, let's take this one for example, it takes you within the lesson and you see a number of activities that you're to perform. This will be explained to you tomorrow, how you know exactly what activity to perform. I'll mention last of all that there are navigational buttons at the top of every lesson. You have a button that takes you back to the table of contents of the units of the ULAT. You have another that takes you to the table of contents of the lessons within the most recently accessed unit. You have a button which takes you to a lexicon, which is like a picture dictionary, you might say, in which you see all of the vocabulary of particular categories. For example, these are verbs that you've learned up to that point, and in clicking on them, lavar, you can hear the word that corresponds to that particular image. Last of all, the last navigational button at the top of any lesson is right here, the ULAT, and of course you click on it, it takes you back to the original page, the home page. There's some additional buttons at the top of the lesson that I'll explain to you in the course of tomorrow's video. Well, that's enough for today. Tomorrow we'll go into more specific detail as to how to actually use a ULAT lesson. We'll look at a lesson, we'll look at the different elements, the parts of it, talk about the symbolic directions, which are pictures that tell you what activity to perform in each section of a particular lesson. So at this point you're free to explore a little bit through the ULAT website, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.